Now, in order to demonstrate weak references and strong references, right, what I've done is I have a sample project here. You can see a sample solution here, and in this sample solution I have a Windows project file here, you can see, and a class library. Now this class library is a very simple class, which is by the name class1, and it has a function called as call me. And this call me function, what it does is it just basically returns a string called as I am the real class. Okay, and this class I have referenced, I have added a reference into my Windows form application. You can see class library 1, and I'm invoking the class call me function in a button click in the form. So basically, I have a class library with a very simple function called as call me, and then basically I am consuming this class library into a simple Windows form UI here, and I'm creating the object and calling the call me function. So let me run this. It's a very pretty simple example. So when I click on the button, I'm going to get a nice message called as I am the real class. Okay, so nice. So what we have here is a very simple Windows form application 1 project consuming the class library 1 project. Okay, so let's build this project, and what we'll do is I'll create a simple folder in my D drive. Okay, so let's say here a simple folder called as strong references and weak references. Okay, so strong references and weak references. It's just a sample, just a folder, to just test our sample. Okay, and what we'll do is, we will quickly copy this DLLs, which are there in our folder, in the compiled folder. So let me just copy this Windows form application 1 bin directory. Let me copy the class library 1 and the Windows form application 1 DLL into a folder, into this folder which I've recently created. And if I run this, if I click on the button, I'm getting I am the real class. So basically everything is working perfectly well. So let's say that if I take this application and I ship it to any deployment environment, and if I run this application, it will work. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll go and close my project. Okay, this complete project I will close it off. Now let's say that you have a very naughty developer over there, or I'll say a hacker friend, or some kind of a person who is mischievous. Okay, now what he wants to do is basically he knows that your Windows form application is referencing this class library 1.dll, which has a call me function, and it is very easy to basically go and look into this DLL and get the function names, because you can always use the ILDSM tool to basically go and see what kind of function names and library names or namespace names does this DLL belong to. Okay, and what he does is he goes ahead and he creates a nice class with the same namespace, with the same class name, and replaces your DLL which is currently present in the production environment. So let's go ahead and let's create a simple class here with the same class name, with the same function name, and let's go and replace that DLL, and let's see what happens. So here's the fake DLL we have created, and with the same class name, with the same namespace name, with the same function name, and what we are saying is this class is not original. Okay, and we can see the solution is also completely different now. Okay, so there is no relation with the previous project what I have. I've created a complete new class library. Only I'm just keeping the class names, the namespace name, and the DLL name as well as the function name same. So let me build this, and let me copy the DLL from the bin folder. So save this as, and let me just copy this DLL from the bin folder. Right, the release. So let me copy this class library 1 DLL, and let me go and paste this DLL over here. So what I've done is I've renamed the old DLL to class library 1.dllx, and I'm replacing this class library 1.dll, which I've spoofed as per the original DLL. So let me go and run this exe now, and let me do a button click. Now you can see that what has happened is basically our original class is completely now replaced, okay, with the code which has been injected by some other third party, and the exe is not complaining about it. And this exe, or Windows form application 1.exe, has no idea which DLL he's invoking. What he does is he just goes and checks by the namespace name and the class name and the function name. So in other words, the exe, he has no idea about, if is the publisher of the DLL, is he original or is he not. Okay, now this is a big security problem. So in other words, let's say that your application is running on production, on a production, must be on the client machine or must be on a server, right? Somebody can come and replace that complete DLL with a code, which he can write by himself, right? So how do we prevent this? So the basic problem here is that the Windows Form application 1.exe, that is the client, has no idea about this DLL, class library 1.dll. It means, in other words, he doesn't know if the publisher, who has published the DLL, is he original publisher or is he a publisher who is fake. And why he doesn't know? Because he is identifying the publisher, by only the class name, the namespace name, and the function name, which is very easy to spoof. So in case, if we are able to basically give, some kind of a strong link between them, right, then that would really, remove this problem. Now this is called as a weak reference. A weak reference is nothing, where your client is identifying the DLL or the assembly by class names and namespace names. So how do we solve the problem of weak references or the problem of client not identifying the valid publisher? Now, in order to create a strong reference, between the Windows application and the class library, we need to actually strong name the assembly. So if you strong name the assembly, what happens is the Windows form doesn't identify the assembly just by class names and library names, but it identifies by a strong name or by a unique identifier, and this unique identifier cannot be created by anyone in the world. Okay. So in order to strong name or sign the assembly, what you need to do is click on the properties, go to the signing tab and click on new, and let's give a key file name. Now what happens is, now the time you go and sign the assembly, it creates a SNK file. Now this SNK file is nothing but, it's basically a key file, which will be associated with your DLL. Okay. So now the bonding between the Windows Form application as well as the class name, as well as your class library, is not just by class names and namespace names, but also by a strong name, which is a unique identifier. Okay. Now let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and build this solution. Okay. And let me just copy this whole exe again back to our folder. So file, save as. So let me go to the bin folder, go to release, and let me copy the exe. So let's go to a D drive. Paste it here. I'll delete the old DLL what I have for now. Okay. And I'll rename this DLL, which was for strong names. This was the DLL which was the hacked DLL. So I'll just give it a name called as hacked. Okay. And let's put the original DLL now. Let's copy this. So if you run this, everything will work fine. Okay. And because this is your real class, now what we'll do is we'll rename this to an old class. Okay, the strong name class, we'll just make it old, and we'll try to use now our hack class which we had created previously. So just let me rename this and say, and now let me run the Windows form. Now if I click on the button, right click, what happens is you can see that it's saying that the public key token is not valid. So in other words, what has happened is now your exe is identifying the DLL not just by the class names and the namespace names, but it's also identifying by the strong name, right? So strong names or strong references means that your client as well as the DLL they are binded with a very strong identifier which cannot be reproduced by anyone. So with this, what happens is your exe understands that this publisher who has given me the DLL is a valid publisher or not. So what are strong references and weak references? In weak references, the client or the exe identifies the DLL by just class names and namespace names, while when we talk about strong names, the exe identifies the DLL by a strong name or by a unique public key token. And how do you actually go and do a strong name, or how do you go and give a strong name to your assembly? It's by clicking right clicking on the properties of the class library and then signing the assembly. So the basic fundamental of strong names is not is not to just go and register into GAC or do something else. But the very important fundamental here is that how can I ensure that the DLL is coming from a valid source, or it is coming from some other unauthorized source.